All right, everyone, we have stunning archaeological news. Talked about it briefly yesterday on the live stream. SAR tomography has been used at the pyramids in Giza, and it turns out that there's something quite unexpected far below the actual pyramids. An enormous structure of tunnels connected to a multiple wells, actually. It looks like, they were using them for water or something. I have a theory, and I would need to see the full readout, the full mapping of the underground structure itself to really flesh out my theory. But here's what I think occurred. I think that was built before the pyramids were built. That is, you need a supply of water. That makes sense. And you need to be able to transit between structures and to move goods and so forth. And they're apparently fully intact in the 600 feet below the earth or something like that. Pretty deep. By the way, link in the description, archived, of course. You can look at the basic schema of the underground tunnels and how large they are. They extend for several kilometers. That's a very large tunnel network. What I think happened is that they drilled that in first, covered it over, and they were using that to move between work sites more than anything else, and to extract resources. And then they could build the pyramids more easily. It could be that they use the water for some sort of hydraulic system. Of course, raising a stone using hydraulics is going to be a little bit easier than having 1,000 people hoeing it on a rope over log rollers or something like that. And the pyramids are enormous. They're hundreds of feet tall. The Great Pyramid is, it's quite large. Now, the outer layer that originally existed, that wouldn't have taken much effort to put into place. But the blocks that were used for the interior and the way that they were laid out, some of these blocks would be difficult to move even with modern machinery. You could, but it would be difficult. So the fact that people that supposedly had nothing beyond Copper Age technology were capable of constructing these things, it's become a little bit of a mystery to people, and I can understand why. Now, we know where the blocks were quarried for both the pyramids and the obelisk. We know that. But how did they transport them over such a great distance? That has never been satisfactorily answered. We know that it wasn't the result of slave labor. The most canonical view is that the blocks were quarried out and then taken sometimes by ship, sometimes possibly on rollers or something. Great distances. They probably used the Nile for this more than anything else. And they were carved out by people who were seasonal. That is, in Egypt, you have a wet season and then you have the growing season, the dry season. So during the sort of winter months, there's not a whole lot for somebody to do. If you're taxing people on their grain and shit like that, then if you're a farmer or peasant laborer, you don't have anything to do during those months. So what people would do is they would go and help build pyramids or whatever other structure they were building, and they would get a stipend. They would get grain from the silos, so to speak. So they would have their meal. And then, of course, specialists and people like that who did medicine and so forth, they were semi-exempt. They would have been on site, but they probably didn't do a lot of brute labor. We have archaeological remains of some of their medicinal compounds and so forth, for example. And some of them were literate. If you were in the priesthood, you weren't helping to build the pyramid, for example. Although the royals might have done it for fun once in a while. I can imagine if I was an Egyptian pharaoh, I'd be like, help me tow this block up there. That'll be fun, just for shits and giggles. I'm imagining that probably happened more often than once. But what happened was you had seasonal labor. You had to tend the crops. Most of that grain and shit went to the silos. You didn't actually keep it. And so if you didn't want to starve, you had to go and help labor on the pyramids or on the Sphinx, which was originally Anubis probably, or something like that. Help with shipbuilding. You had to have multiple skills. It's actually a very complex and sophisticated society when you really think about it. Maybe some of these people went into embalming or something like that. Even the poor tended to be embalmed, although it was a little bit more slipshod than what you would see with the pharaoh. Um, so they did SAR here and found that there was enormous tunnel complex under these pyramids. It's probably even bigger than that. I don't think that they have probably even fully mapped out the whole thing. It could be 10 kilometers long. We have no clue. They're still finding tombs all of the time, all over the Valley of the Kings and stuff like that. There are probably smaller pyramids that are buried in a sand dune somewhere in Egypt or in the Sudan or something like that. They're probably still there. Some of these things might be fully intact. A treasure greater than King Tut's treasure could literally be waiting out there underneath a giant sand dune. This is entirely possible, as the civilization, after having effectively collapsed, was lost to ruination over time and was incapable of being maintained. Well, the people there, of course, because of religious tradition mainly, weren't exactly going to tell the Romans or the Greeks or anyone else that marched in where those tombs were. There's a reason why the Valley of the Kings was not discovered until fairly contemporary times, after everyone kept their mouth shut. Yeah, there's a bunch of dead kings out there. Don't tell nobody. This has happened in more than one civilization. Reminds me, by the way, when people talk about the use of ancient energy, and they say maybe they were doing like chemical reactions down in the tunnels and vibrating the pyramids and making energy. Don't believe in that. But it did remind me of the Bach saga, especially with the staircases that are explicitly mentioned in this article, like spiral staircases down into these tunnel systems. That reminds me of the Lemminkainen Temple. Been reminded of it more and more often lately. Supposedly, there's a large spiral silver staircase going down behind a sealed off rock wall up in Hel, up in Scandinavia. And it was used for ancient worship purposes. It's a temple and filled potentially with treasure or at least, relics and remains of some sort and I was there before the Ice Age. It was sealed up specifically for that purpose, or at a later date. It kind of depends. It gets a little bit messy, and I happen to agree with it. I've got a copy of the Bach Saga, actually, which was written by one of your Bach's contemporaries. I have a feeling that world history is a little bit different than what we've been told. Over the last 100 years, for example, we learned that the people in South America and in the tropics managed to land improve an area the size of Great Britain. They had a road system, they had raised villages, they had stone structures. This is completely different from what was originally learned. We thought it's a bunch of cannibals running around with Stone Age technology at best, basically wooden sticks. Sticks. But that's not actually what happened. We've learned that there was a significantly larger amount of trade between people in the world. We've learned more about the human lineage than all of prior history. Within the last couple of decades, we've expanded our knowledge more than in the prior century. And in that prior century, expanded it more than in the prior 1,000 years. Things are heating up, as you can see. We've learned that the human timeline is vastly different than what originally was conceived of when the average person became literate within the population 100, 200 years ago. It's vastly different. Our founding fathers were debating over whether aliens existed, basically like 1700 Star Trek fans. Uh, this has been a thing for quite some time, Victorian era. Huge search into human spirituality as colonialism branched out, people were experiencing other cultures and learning more about their oral traditions, writings, and so forth, especially Hinduism, Buddhism, things from the Far East. And that impacted greatly the entire world order. This, I believe, is going to become one of the major archaeological discoveries of the century. I mean, it already is, but I think that when they explore these areas, they're probably going to find all sorts of cool shit. It's going to be great. I can't wait. And somebody who was always obsessed with science and history, I can't wait for additional findings. That's about all. Peace out.